Hello. We're facing lots of different situations at the moment, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and there's a crisis going on. And I guess we're asking the question, how can we continue? How can we keep going? How can we continue to follow Jesus? How can we continue to stand firm amidst all of the uncertain times that are going on around us? When things, we've taken away all the familiar things. And in terms of how we worship God and how we follow God, we're having to come back to look at what that means and how we do that. And so today and next week, we're looking at how to stand firm during times of uncertainty. How can we do that as individuals? How can we do that as a church, as Elm Park Baptist Church, or whichever church you're part of? And we're going to do that by looking at a story. And it's a story about a group of people who wandered away from God. And this story serves as a warning to us all, not to be like them, not to take the path that they took. These people did not stand firm. These people wandered away and disobeyed God. And we're going to share this story, and we're going to look at and unpack this story over the next couple of weeks. And we're going to look at ways in which we can not be like them, that we can stand firm, that we can trust in God, that we can believe in God, that we can encourage each other. And the story begins in Egypt. Hundreds of years ago, the Jewish people were in Egypt and they were slaves. It had been 400 years since the time of Joseph. Joseph had saved the people, and now the Egyptians had made the Israelites into slaves. And they were in bondage and working very, very hard and suffering. And so they began to cry out to God for help. God, save us. God, deliver us. God, set us free from slavery. And God heard their cry, and he sent them a deliverer, somebody called Moses. And Moses was called by God to go and to say to Pharaoh, let my people go. And the Israelites were set free from slavery. It was a miracle. God sent plagues. The final plague was the death of the firstborn. But because God told the people to take the lamb's blood and put it on the doorframe, they were saved. They were saved because of the blood of the lamb. And they came out. And we are saved from slavery. We are saved from sin because of Jesus. Because Jesus, the Lamb of God, his blood has been shed for us. And when we apply his blood to our hearts and our lives, we are saved. We are set free from slavery. And we begin this incredible journey from slavery to the promised land, to the city that God is calling us all to go to, the kingdom of God. And so they began this journey. God set them free. The first big barrier they faced was the Red Sea, and yet God did a miracle to enable them to go through the Red Sea. He loved these people. He had great plans for these people. He showed them how to live. They'd had 400 years in Egypt and they didn't know how to live. So he gives them the law, gives them the commandments, and shows them the best way to live. And he has plans to bring them into a land. It's a land full of milk and honey. And it's a land in which they're going to bless the whole world. God's plan is that all people on earth are going to be blessed through his people, through this land. And so it's a big plan that God has. And so he's going to provide for them on the journey. He's going to give them food. He's going to give them manna, something they'd never seen before. He's going to give them birds to eat, meat. He's going to give them water. He's going to give them what they need. Their clothes are not going to wear out. Their feet are not going to swell up, because God is going to look after them on this amazing journey. It's not long, though, before they start to moan. They start to grumble. In fact, Grumbling became the number one thing that they did. They were moaning. They became professional moaners. And this moaning was not something that just was one or two occasions. This continued through the whole of the journey. Continual grumbling, continual moaning, continual complaining. And it wasn't everybody who was complaining. It was just a small group of people. But you know what it's like? Just a small group of people. Moses called them the rabble. And they're a group of people, and many people believe these people didn't really fully believe in God, that they hadn't really experienced God, that they didn't have a relationship with God. They didn't actually know God, but they just come along for the ride. They were passengers on the journey. They wanted to leave Egypt as well, so they joined in with everybody else. But this group of people were never happy. They were never happy unless they were moaning, and they did a lot of moaning. And this moaning, even though it was only a small group, spread throughout the whole of the community. So at times it seemed like everybody was moaning, because that's what happens. Bad yeast spreads throughout the whole batch. And they moaned against Moses, their leader. They grumbled against him. In fact, I don't think there's any one occasion when anybody really thanked Moses or appreciated him for what he'd done for them. They would often turn against him. They would always question his authority. They would often rebel against his leadership. But behind Moses, it wasn't really Moses they were rebelling against. It was God. It was God himself that they didn't want to follow. It's God himself that they were rebelling against. So there's many different occasions when they rebel and when they moan and when they grumble. Exodus 14, when they come to the Red Sea, they see that the Egyptian army's coming and the people are terrified, and they cry out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." They had a short memory. They'd forgotten that they were slaves just a few weeks ago. And now they're saying it'd be much better for us to be there. As soon as they reach a crisis, as soon as they reach difficulty, they turn against their leader. But they were really turning against God. In Exodus chapter 15, they come to a place where they're looking for water. It says, for 3 days they travelled in the desert without finding water. They came to Marah. They could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" You notice the word grumble? They grumbled. Grumbling is like a brrr, and it continues. It rumbles on and on and on. Exodus 16, it says, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you've brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Again, short-term memories, romanticising the past, looking backwards instead of looking forwards, thinking about just their own immediate needs and not losing the big picture, and grumbling against Moses, against Aaron. Numbers chapter 11, the rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions and garlic. But now we've lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." They were despising the very thing that God was providing for them on a daily basis. They were looking to the past, romanticising it, and they were grumbling and wailing against Moses. And this continued throughout the whole of the journey. Continual grumbling, continual moaning. Exodus chapter 17 is the passage that's described in the psalm we're looking at today, Psalm 95. It says, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarrelled with Moses. The word quarrel is there now. Give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarrelled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So those two words, Massah, means testing. They're putting the Lord their God to the test. And Meribah means quarrelling. They had a spirit of quarrelling amongst them and quarrelling against Moses. So we've got grumbling and quarrelling happening on a regular basis. And then they came to a place called Kadesh, where there was an oasis. And they sent out spies into the land on a 40-day mission. 12 spies, one from each tribe. And they came back to the community. And 2 of the spies said, God has called us to go into this land, and we need to go in and take possession of the land, and the Lord will help us. It's a good land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. But 10 of the spies said, it is a good land, but we'll never be able to conquer it, and we can't go in. We're too small. And so because of that unbelief, fear and unbelief began to spread throughout the whole community. And instead of going into the land, they're on the edge of the promised land now. This was the end of their journey from slavery. They turned around and they went back to the desert. And they spent the next 40 years wandering in disobedience until every single one of those people had died in the desert, apart from Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies that gave a good report. They went into the land 40 years later, and the next generation went in as well. You see, when we don't believe in God, and when we don't trust in God, and when we start to grumble and quarrel and moan and look to the past and not look to the future, and live in unbelief and lack of trust in God, and become selfish and start to focus on our own needs and our own things, and have a lust for the immediate and lose the hope in the ultimate, we forget the big plan, we forget the goal, we forget where we're heading, and instead we focus on our needs, our likes, our dislikes, our comfort, our lack of comfort, the flavour of the food, what's happening immediately in front of us, and we lose sight of the big picture. So the question we need to ask today is, how can we not be like those people on that journey? How can we change? How can we stand firm in a time of uncertainty? And we're looking at Psalm 95, and in Psalm 95 are some amazing truths that can help us to stand firm and to know what God is calling us to do, so that we take heed and we don't become like the people that happened, our ancestors on that tragic journey all those years ago.